Okay, so if you're an English learner trying to get past those intermediate plateaus, you know the feeling, right? You need those richer long-form articles to really deepen your vocabulary. But jumping into, say, a big feature piece, it can feel like, well, like trying to drink from a fire hose. Just overwhelming. And that's our mission today. We're diving into the best resources, but maybe even more importantly, the actual strategy you need. How do you turn those dense articles, the explainers, the long features into tools that genuinely build your comprehension and listening skills fast? Because the research really backs this up. Tackling this harder stuff is the quickest way to mastery. You get exposed to complex sentences, higher level language, stuff you just don't find elsewhere.
Exactly. And what we've done is basically synthesize the best places to find this content and, crucially, a practical four-step way to use it. We found there are sort of two main paths you can take. First, there are sites made specifically for learners, which give you a lot of support, like scaffolding. And then there's the advanced stuff, the general news sites. For those, you need a completely different game plan. Our whole goal here is to give you a shortcut. Not just finding the articles, but knowing how to squeeze every drop of learning value out of them. We're really focusing on sites that either have dedicated audio already or articles that work really well if you read them aloud and then, break them down.
Right. Let's start with that scaffolding then. Those resources built just for learners. They often have transcripts, built-in audio. Basically, they handle some of the heavy lifting so you can just focus on understanding the English. First up, a real classic, BBC Learning English. It's just consistently good. They use news and current events for their lessons. We found their series like 6-Minute English is particularly strong. The language is clear, it's well-structured, and you almost always get audio and a transcript. It's a great way to warm up.
Yeah, BBC is solid. But, here's something really interesting we found, especially if you find native speakers talk way too fast. You absolutely need to check out Voice of America Learning English, or VOA. Their whole approach is quite unique. They use this method called special English.
Special English. Okay, what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, it means two key things. First, they deliberately use a smaller core vocabulary list, simpler words. And second, they read everything news, features on American life, science stories at a noticeably slower pace, controlled speed. So if you constantly feel like you're struggling to keep up, VOA is basically the perfect bridge. It lets you catch your breath.
Okay, but I have to push back there a little. If the vocabulary is limited, isn't that kind of limiting? Like, how do you get to that C1 or C2 level, that real advanced fluency? If you're stuck with a simpler word list, won't that hold you back?
That's a really, really important question. And the thinking behind the methodology suggests, actually, no, it doesn't hold you back in the long run. See, the main value of special English isn't really the limited vocabulary itself. It's that it lets you isolate syntax, sentence structure.
Isolate the syntax.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, because the words are simpler. You're not struggling with vocabulary and complex sentences at the same time. It lets your brain focus entirely on how English sentences are built, how clauses connect, how ideas flow, how arguments are structured. You're practicing decoding the architecture of the language without the extra cognitive load of tons of new words. Think of it like structural training wheels.
Okay. Training wheels. I get it.
You build that core comprehension engine first, then you start adding the high-octane vocabulary fuel later.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. You're isolating the variables. That's actually quite clever. And speaking of structure and knowing where you are, if you're wondering about your specific level, you really should look at the British Council Learn English site. This one's super valuable because they actually categorize their content, and they have a lot of it, magazines, stories, using the CEFR levels, B1, B2, C1. You can see exactly what level something is aimed at.
Yes, and that clarity is absolutely key. It helps you find the right challenge. If you're at B2, you're functional. You can get by, understand most things. But C1, that's where you get that real fluency, handling complex topics with nuance. The British Council site lets you pick content that pushes you just enough from B2 towards C1, say, without it being that overwhelming fire hose we mentioned.
Right, finding that sweet spot.
Exactly. And their audio zone is especially good for longer recordings. And again, they usually come with transcripts.
Okay, good tip. And then rounding out this sort of scaffolding group, there's ESL Fast, which is also known as Rongchang. The big thing here is just sheer volume. If you need tons of material for listening practice, this is the place. They have something like 3,000 short stories, and this specific collection called 365 Essays for English Learners.
Mm.
So if you want consistent narrative-style stuff to just listen to and absorb sentence patterns, the quantity they offer is pretty amazing.
Right. So, okay, we've got the entry points covered. Level-specific stuff like British Council, controlled speed with VOA, massive volume with ESL, fast. But what happens next? What happens when you've nailed B2, maybe you're pushing C1, and you want that truly native-like mastery?
Yeah, this is the big jump, isn't it? Moving away from learner-focused sites and
Right.
tackling authentic native-level material.
Precisely. Now we're talking about the deep dive sources. The research really points to what we started calling the big four for this kind of high-level reading. We're looking at the New York Times, the Guardian, the Atlantic, and the New Yorker.
Ah, the heavy hitters.
Absolutely. The articles in these publications, that's the gold standard for complex, sophisticated, native speaker English. You want to look for things labeled explainers or investigative reports or those long feature stories. They're dense, packed with vocabulary, complex idioms, designed for careful reading.
Okay, but like you said, these places offer zero support for learners. No slow audio, no vocab lists, and the articles can be thousands of words long. So if I just try to sit down and read an entire article from The Atlantic, I'm probably going to feel completely lost, right? Drown in it.
Totally lost, yes. And that feeling, that's your signal. It means your method has to change, fundamentally. The consistent advice we found is this. You cannot just passively read or listen to these entire long pieces. It doesn't work. Instead, you need to pick a long article, yes, but then only read a short, manageable section aloud, maybe a few paragraphs.
Read it aloud. Why aloud specifically?
Ah, good question. Then, after reading that short chunk aloud, you must pause immediately. And in that pause, you actively analyze and explain the tricky bits, the complex vocabulary, the difficult grammar or phrasing, before you even think about moving on to the next section.
Wait, back up. Why read it aloud? Isn't silent reading faster? Or just listening to audio if it's available? What's the magic in actually speaking it?
It's about active reinforcement. It's multisensory. When you read aloud, you're linking the visual input, seeing the words, with the auditory input, hearing your own voice, and the physical, kinesthetic input actually forming the words.
Muscle memory for language.
Exactly. That combination dramatically boosts memory retention compared to just silent reading. It's not just about speed, it's about embedding it deeper. Plus, it forces you to engage with pronunciation, intonation, phrasing. You're actively modeling the native patterns, not just passively receiving them.
Okay, that makes sense. It's moving from just consumption to active modeling and breaking it down.
That's the core shift, from consumption to analysis.
All right, so we know where to find the stuff, the learner sites, and the advanced ones. And we know what to do with the advanced stuff. Read short bits aloud, pause, analyze. Let's nail down that analysis part. What does that actually look like? We need a clear, step-by-step process, something repeatable.
Yes, absolutely. So, based on what works, here's a practical 4-step strategy to really maximize the learning from each segment you tackle. Step 1. Introduce the topic. Real quick, maybe 60 seconds max. Before you read the segment aloud, just briefly explain the main point of that section. And crucially, mention maybe 3 or 4 key, potentially difficult vocabulary words that are about to come up, kind of preloading them.
Preloading, okay, priming the brain. I like it.
Exactly. It helps you recognize them in context when you hear or read them.
Then step 2, read the article segment. This is where you do that reading aloud we talked about. Read it clearly at a deliberate pace, maybe slightly slower than your natural speed, but keep it engaging, not robotic. Active modeling.
Right. Then comes step 3, the deep work post-reading analysis. This is honestly the most important part. It's non-negotiable. This determines if the learning sticks, and it needs 3 specific things every time. First, review 5 to 10 key vocabulary words from that section you just read.
Just the key ones, not every single unknown word.
Right. Focus on the words that carry the main meaning or are particularly useful high-level terms. Second, you absolutely must discuss one interesting grammar point or maybe a complex sentence structure you noticed in that segment.
Okay. Both vocab and grammar. Why both right after reading? Isn't just knowing the words enough sometimes?
Well, think of it like this. Vocabulary gives you the building blocks, the tiles. But grammar, that's the cement, the structure that holds them together.
Okay. Tiles and cement. Nice analogy.
Yeah, if you only learn words, you just have a pile of loose tiles. You don't know how to build anything meaningful. By analyzing a grammar point, maybe how they used a tricky conditional, or an inversion for emphasis, you learn how native speakers actually assemble those words to create complex meaning. You need the definition and the mechanism.
Definition and mechanism. Got it. What's the third element of step 3?
The third element, and this is critical for retention, is you ask yourself or have someone ask you a comprehension question about the content of that segment. Something simple like, what was the main argument in that paragraph? Or what example did the author use? It forces you to recall and synthesize the information immediately.
Yeah, that really forces you to check if you actually understood the ideas, not just the words. The retention check.
Precisely. It makes the learning active, not passive.
And then the final step.
Step 4. Offer the transcript and link. Always make sure you have easy access to the original article link or a transcript if you made one. This lets you go back later, maybe read along while listening again, or just visually review that tricky sentence structure you analyzed in step 3, reinforcement.
Okay, let's pull this all together then. What we've uncovered are basically 2 clear pathways for using long-form articles. Path 1 is using the structured, learner-focused sites, like VOA with its special English for managing speed, or British Council for picking content at your specific CEFR level. That's the scaffolding.
Right. And path 2 is for when you're ready for the deep end, tackling the gold standard native content like The New Yorker or The Guardian. But for that path, the strategy is completely different. It demands active engagement, selecting small chunks, reading them aloud, and doing that immediate structured analysis, vocab, grammar, and comprehension. No skipping steps.
So what does this all really mean for you, the listener, trying to get fluent?
I think it means moving beyond just hitting play on audio or scanning an article. That passive approach just doesn't cut it for deep learning. The real power, the thing that accelerates your progress, is that structured follow-up, that focused analysis after each little segment. Digging into the vocab, wrestling with the grammar, and then forcing yourself to answer, what did I learn? That's what makes the difference. That's what ensures every minute spent with the material actually counts towards fluency.
So the article itself is almost just the raw material. The real work, the real learning, happens in that structured analysis afterwards.
Exactly. The article is the vehicle, the analysis is the engine driving you forward. And, that leads us to a final thought, something to chew on. We talked about asking that comprehension question in step 3. What's really fascinating here is how powerful that simple act of pausing is. Just stopping. Turning away from the screen or the page for a moment and actively asking yourself, okay, wait, what did I actually just take in? That intentional pause, that moment of reflection, it transforms everything. It turns passive exposure into active, focused learning. It makes every word work for you, solidifying the knowledge.
It shifts gears from input to processing.
Precisely. So the challenge is, go find a really good, meaty feature article today, something that looks a bit intimidating. Break off just the first few paragraphs, read them aloud, and then stop. Ask yourself, what did I just learn? What word stood out? What sentence felt complex? Start that analysis. That's where the magic happens.